They paid 340 credits for the survey. That was the number on the intake form, 340 continuance standard, transferable on departure, non-negotiable. I'd seen worse terms on freight runs through Sector Orath-Vel, and at least this one didn't require me to lift anything. Sign the consent block. Submit to the mapping sequence. Wait in the holding cell while the Veth-Doran Biological Survey Authority did whatever it was they needed to do with my cellular architecture. Collect the payment on exit. 2 days. Clean bunk. 3 meals from the dispensary that were at least identifiable as food. I signed. The intake archivist was one of the winged ones. 4 limbs, membrane translucent enough that I could see the fluid moving through the structures underneath when the overhead light caught it right. Compound eyes. The whole cast moved the way insects move when they've decided something isn't worth tracking. Too slow for panic, too deliberate for anything else. It processed my form without looking at me. Stamped 3 times, handed me a locator badge and a cell assignment. The mapping sequence will begin at 0600, it said. You will remain still for the duration. There is nothing to be concerned about. I told it I wasn't concerned. It looked at me then, just for a second. Compound eyes don't focus the way single lens eyes do. You can't always tell what they're reading. But I had the sense that whatever it saw in my face didn't match what its intake classification said I was supposed to look like, and it filed that small discrepancy somewhere very deep and moved on. The intake classification, for the record, said, Non-combatant, Biological Survey Grade, Class 44 Origin World. That last designation was the reason I was worth 340 credits instead of the standard 90. Class 44 Biology was considered exotic by continuance taxonomy standards. High bone density, elevated oxygen uptake ceiling, pressure tolerance indices that sat in the upper quartile of known sapient species. Good data. Rare data. Worth mapping carefully. The classification did not say anything else about me. Classifications rarely do. I ate a dispensary meal that approximated something grain-based and went to sleep on the bunk. The mapping sequence took 4 hours. I lay on a platform in the center of a room that smelled like processed air and something faintly chemical. Not unpleasant, just sterile in the way that reminded me of field medical tents on the outer survey runs, the ones where you came in with 3 cracked ribs and left with a compression wrap and a dose of something that made the edges soft. The archivists moved around the platform in silence. The equipment did whatever equipment does. I read the ceiling. At hour 2, the senior archivist, Survey Director Veth-Doran, according to the badge, a larger specimen of the same winged cast, membrane edged in a darker amber that I'd come to understand meant something about rank, paused at the data display and made a sound I'd learned to read as satisfaction. Complete cellular topology acquired, it said to the room. Not to me. Cross-reference lattice at 97.4. Replication viability confirmed. One of the junior archivists, Veth-Doran, smaller, membrane still the pale transparent of a newer adult, asked something in continuance standard too fast for my translation chip. Veth-Doran answered without looking up. The structural integrity parameters hold, it said. The duplicate will be functionally identical. That is the entire point. I didn't ask what the duplicate was for. That wasn't in the consent form, and it wasn't my business. 340 credits. Clean bunk. I went back to the ceiling. They returned me to the holding cell at noon. The cell was 4 meters by 3, with a fixed bench, a dispensary port, and a small viewport that looked out over the loading concourse. I watched freight handlers, 3 species I didn't recognize and 1 Varathi I did, work a pallet stack in the mid-distance. The Varathi was doing the lifting, that tracked. I ate another dispensary meal and did the joint mobility work I do every morning and every evening, the sequence that the 11th Expeditionary's field medic had given me after the second outer survey rotation, when my left knee started making a sound like gravel in a bag. 12 years of that sequence. It takes 14 minutes. My left knee still makes the sound, but it doesn't catch anymore, and that is a reasonable trade. I was on the 3rd repetition when the door seal cycled, and Veth-Doran came in. Outside the viewport, the Varathi had finished the pallet stack and was working on a second one. It was doing it wrong, loading heavy to the top, and I watched it for a few seconds before deciding that wasn't my problem, and going back to the mobility sequence. 14 minutes. My left knee made its sound. I finished anyway. It stood in the doorway for a moment, the way the junior archivists always stood, like it had arrived with a question and was deciding whether the question was worth asking out loud. Then it stepped inside and let the door seal behind it. "The replication is complete," it said. I told it that was good to hear. "The duplicate is being processed through the exit sequence now." It paused. "As a parallel test of functional equivalence." I waited. "It has not cleared the pressure threshold at the end of Corridor 7. Another pause. Longer. "Corridor 7 runs an atmospheric gradient between the survey block and the loading concourse. The gradient is a 17-point differential. Standard pressure acclimatization sequence. Every certified survey subject completes it on exit." I knew Corridor 7. I'd walked it on intake. "The duplicate is biologically identical to you," Veth-Doran said. "Every cellular structure, every tissue density, the oxygen uptake efficiency, the cardiovascular output, the bone mineral density, which is," the director noted on intake, "significantly higher than continuance baseline." It stopped. "It is identical." "But," I said. Veth-Doran's compound eyes did the thing they do when the cast is recalibrating. A stillness that isn't stillness, more like everything going very quiet, while something behind the eyes changes its filing system. "It reached the pressure threshold at the midpoint of the gradient and stopped moving," it said. "The body's systems are intact. The cellular response to pressure differential is within your mapped parameters. But it stopped." I thought about Corridor 7. The gradient hits you around the 50-meter mark, a tightening across the chest, a faint pressure behind the eyes, the inner ear doing its usual complaint. Nothing you'd call pain exactly. The kind of thing your body logs as information and then sets aside because you're still moving, and moving is the main task. I had walked it on intake without registering it as an event. I had, on an outer survey run 7 years back, walked a Class 44 pressure gradient, 3 times that magnitude, with a cracked clavicle and 2 units of freight that needed to reach the relay station before the weather window closed. My body's relationship with discomfort is long and not particularly emotional. "I've been in worse gradients," I said. "Yes," Veth-Doran said. We sat with that for a moment. "The director's position," it continued, "is that there is an error in the replication parameter set, that the mapping sequence failed to capture some biological variable that accounts for the functional discrepancy." It paused. "Director Veth-Doran has logged the survey as a partial failure and has commenced a review of the equipment calibration." "That sounds like a lot of paperwork," I said. "Yes," Veth-Doran was quiet for a moment. "I submitted a dissenting notation to the survey record. I noted that the biological parameters were captured correctly, that the duplicate is, in every cellular sense, identical to you." I waited. "I noted," it said carefully, "that the survey methodology does not currently include a parameter for accumulated functional tolerance, for the specific and measurable difference between a body that has been through 17 years of conditions outside continuance baseline and an identical body that has not." It paused. The director rejected the notation as outside survey scope. "Probably right," I said. "Doesn't fit in a cell topology." Veth-Doran looked at me. "No," it said. "It does not." The departure form took about 8 minutes. The exit desk officer, not an archivist, a general admin caste, brown chitinous, clearly unhappy about the hold on my processing, stamped it without comment, and processed the 340 credit transfer without being asked. Corridor 7 was empty. The gradient hit at the 50-meter mark, the way it always did. My inner ear filed its usual complaint. My left knee made its sound. I kept moving. On the far side, in the loading concourse, I found a bench near the freight transit board and sat down to wait for the next departure to Sector Ossian-Vel. The board updated. The Varathi freight team finished their pallet stack. Somewhere behind me, in Classification Block 7, Director Veth-Doran was reviewing equipment calibration reports. I read the transit schedule and found a departure in 40 minutes, and thought that was about right.